Hello, welcome to The Local Perspective. I'm Jerry Deschane. I'm the Executive Director of the League of Wisconsin Municipalities. And in cooperation with your local cable television station and Wisconsin Eye, a great partner of ours, we bring you this program once a month to talk about issues that matter to local government in Wisconsin. Today we're going to talk about blowing up the tax system. I'll get to that in just a minute. My guest is State Representative John Macco. Representative Macco, 88th Assembly District. Hello.
Hi.
Thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Go through your resume here. You represent the eastern side of Green Bay.
Yep, that's right. The eastern half of Brown County. So the eastern half of Green Bay, for those familiar, would be East Green Bay, town of Bellevue, Ledgeview, East of Pier, and down to the town of Glenmore. So essentially the eastern half of Brown County.
Okay, eastern half of Brown County. You're a financial advisor by trade, but
Yep.
you promised not to get into things like yield curve and other words I don't understand.
Yeah, we can later. It'll be really fun. Inverted yield curves and price earnings ratios are fun stuff.
When I step out for a few minutes, you go ahead with that. He's a business person, founder. I'm sure a lot of you are thinking, okay, I recognize that name. Yes, you do. He is the founder of Macco's floor covering centers.
You even asked me how to say that.
Well, I did. Beforehand, I asked because I used to watch WGN in Chicago, and there's Macco is a transmission something or other, isn't it?
Car painting, but that's 2 A's and 1 C. We're 1 A and 2 C's.
So did you ever think about competing with them?
No.
Do a little car painting and flooring? And no?
No.
Doesn't work?
No.
Representative Macco, given his financial background, was put on the Assembly Ways and Means Committee. You're the chair of the Ways and Means Committee.
Yep, that's right.
And well, let's start with sort of you, and then I'll dive into what in the world
Sure.
are you up to. You're a successful businessman. Why did you run for the Wisconsin legislature?
You know, people ask me that all the time, and I always tell them, I'm not sure I even want to do it now. But I think, if you believe in stewardship and you believe in community, I've always been involved, and literally started with volunteering for the Boy Scouts Christmas tree sale, and led to different things. And the next thing you know, they call and they say, "Hey, would you be interested? We want to come." They actually called and they said, "We want to come up and talk to you." I go, "No, don't come and talk to me." They go, "No, we want to come and talk to you." I go, "Please don't come. I'm not running for nothing." And so here I am. We first ran for the U.S. Senate 4 years ago, and we barely lost that race. But it was an interesting experience. And I guess the mind, once expanded, never returns to its original size. And I said to my wife, well, that was disappointing, but I think we could do some good. And I said, don't be surprised if they call again. So I assumed they would call again in 4 years to have me run for the Senate again. And a year later, they said, hey, look, we're going to have this seat in the Assembly race. You only lost that district by 63 votes. We'd like you to take that. I then won that election by, that district, by the way, on a generic day is about 52% Republican, but we won at 56.25 right out of the bat in this last election at 61. So I think our message is clear and people like what we're doing, and so I'm real proud to represent them in the Assembly. It didn't matter to me if I was an assemblyman or a senator. I just felt we could get some things done from a legislative standpoint. And as a citizen legislator, I felt I needed to I never understood what a community organizer was. I mean, that's a Monday morning quarterback that sits around and yells that stuff should get done. And so I think I must do something. I always accomplishes more than something must be done. And so I did. I thought, all right, fine. You know what? I can sit and complain about it, or I can get off the couch and go down and do that. So that's what we're doing.
Well, and where you landed, I don't know if this is your first task or the biggest one, blowing up the tax system. That's my phrase for it.
Yeah, you're saying that.
What is your plan? What is the committee's goal here with a review of Wisconsin, how we pay for things?
So as a business guy, so we built several businesses, the Macco's Floor Covering Center stores, so there's 6 of those locations throughout northeastern Wisconsin with over 200 employees and 50 trucks running on there, 60 trucks running on the road. My brother owns and runs that company now. We then built the Macco Financial Group. We do financial planning and asset management for clients in 16 states. My son runs that company. Our son Nicholas has a company down in Chattanooga, Tennessee, where he's got about 110 employees. He just turned 31 last week and was on the Inc. 500 fastest. He's the second fastest growing company in all the state of Tennessee.
Is it an extension of what you're doing
up
here?
No, totally different. Fascinating, but business and development is once we've learned, from the generations, it's fun. And we started out with nothing, literally making a gallon of powdered milk and a gallon of regular milk and mixing it together so we wouldn't taste the chalk. We had 8 people living in a 1,200 square foot house. But, we worked really hard and made a lot of mistakes. If I ever write a book, I'm going to, first of all, the 3/4 of it is going to be all the dumb stuff that we've done. But I sat down and I looked at it, and I've got a little bit of an understanding of finance. So I started looking at some of the problems that we had to 2 areas of expertise. One is disability rights issues. So the very first bill that I authored was the 529 ABLE accounts, to give folks with disabilities the same benefit of putting away for school and college and some other issues that non-disabled, non-special needs people do. So that was the very first thing, and we've got a whole group of special needs disability bills that will be coming out again, because I know that 80% of the folks with disabilities would like to work, and yet only 18% of them do. And so a fascinating time. It's a little bit tangential to what you want to talk about today, but I have a great fellow that I work with who is a advocate for folks with special needs, and he said to me last April 15th, he said, "I love today." And I go, "You love April 15th? Nobody likes April 15th. Why would you like April 15th, David?" And he said, "Because I get to file a tax return like everybody else." Wow. And I thought about that. I thought how powerful that was. So those are some of the main things that we do. But what I'm really skilled at, I think, is business and tax policy. So I sat and I looked at some of these issues, and I thought, well, you can't have, the conversation started with personal property tax and the problems that we've had with personal property tax over the years. But I think it's unfair to have a conversation about personal property tax unless you talk about regular property tax. And you can't really talk about regular property tax unless you talk about income tax and sales tax and corporate tax and use tax and excise tax and alternative minimum tax. And you can just go on and on and on all of these issues.
Which is usually the point at which a legislator says, and just drops the whole conversation.
It's important, Jerry, for people to realize how comprehensive this is. The state of Wisconsin is a $36 billion entity. Now let me put that into perspective. That's $100 million every single day. Now, I come from Green Bay. The budget for the entire city of Green Bay is $105 million. For a year. We spend that in one day down here. Mm-hmm. The entire budget for the University of Wisconsin Green Bay is $94 million. We spend that in one day down here. It's massive. Our GDP for the state of Wisconsin is $290 billion. That's the same size as the country of Singapore or the country of Israel or the country of Philippines. That's how big we are. Yeah. Another example, so for all of you hear all of the examples of how great things are in North Dakota, and they're mining oil and digging oil, and their economy is going fantastic. And it is, and good for them. They're doing a great job in North Dakota. But do you know that they do in GDP, we do in GDP in 10 weeks what North Dakota does in an entire year.
Without oil, without any real natural resource tax.
The state of Wisconsin is either number 1 or number 2, depending on the year, in manufacturing in all the nation. We flip-flop between us and Indiana. Right now it happens to be Indiana. That's how big it is. So that you hit the nail on the head. This has been tried and people have looked at it, but they've only ever carried it just so far. Mm-hmm. And for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So if you pull this lever, then what happens over here? And so you have to have these conversations and you start to look at it.
Yep. You eliminate personal property tax, residential taxes go up.
Right, if that's all you do.
Something happens.
If that's all you do. Mm-hmm. If you eliminate the lower income tax bracket for folks, then they automatically qualify for alternative minimum tax. Well, you don't want that, so you got to fix the AMT, the alternative minimum tax conversation. So you start looking at all these things, and I'm okay with that. It's like, great, let's have that conversation. Let's create a spreadsheet to keep track of that. Let's get involved in all of this stuff and start looking at all these moving parts. And through the process that we've had, and my objective all along is how can we take the Ways and Means Committee. Mm-hmm. And I lobbied our speaker to have that position since I started. So I was vice chair in my first term, and I'm chair now.
Right.
And so leading that, and as a chair, you get a lot of flexibility and latitude, and I'm really enjoying myself. But to have a conversation on the entire process, and it's hard because a lot of my colleagues are really, really great. They can speak extemporaneously about their topics like I can speak to this. So they may be very astute in healthcare or very astute in education. And so it's very challenging to bring folks along so that they can have some understanding to make a quality decision. I want them to be able, I don't want to ask them to make a decision with insufficient data. So we're working on how do we develop this message and process and come up with some quality ideas that could provide an economic structure. And the good news is, Jerry, we don't need more money. It's not that we need more money, we just have it in the wrong piles. It's an inefficient portfolio of revenue streams that if we could get it set up right, and if we have the guts to do it, we would have a tax system that looks like we designed it on purpose.
Okay, let's stop right there. When you say we've got it in the wrong buckets, what do you mean? Our income taxes are too high, sales taxes are too low,
Sure.
property taxes?
Yep, and so things have changed over the years. First of all, our economy has changed. At one point in time, you knew what was if you could pick it up and throw it, you bought it. Was something that was taxable. And that's not true anymore. We have the service economy. We have a massive amount of things that are bought online. I don't know that we went to any retail stores for any of our Christmas shopping. I'm fairly certain that we did all of our Christmas shopping from the sofa and had all of this stuff shipped in. And that is significant. Even software. There was a time when you would go buy a piece of software. You would buy it in a store in a box, pay tax on it, go back in, load the disk into your system. You don't do that anymore. You log online, you download the thing, pay your fee, and there it is. But yet, that was a transaction. And what do we do in the future when Uber starts delivering groceries to your house? What is the mechanism in place to acknowledge that? So again, this may be a little boring and esoteric for some folks, but there's some big comprehensive things. There was a bill that was, there was a case literally by the Quill Pen Company.
Yep, very familiar.
And so we need to, there's a very high likelihood that needs to be changed. And the conversation there is you can't have taxation without representation. So where is that representation? And most states argue that wherever the person sits and resides and they're consuming that product, that's where it is. But you can see how complicated it could be.
Right.
So let's say you're traveling. You have a credit card that's domiciled in a bank in Massachusetts. You are from Wisconsin. You are traveling to Hawaii, but you happen to have a layover in Denver. And while you're sitting there, you get online and you order a shirt from a company in Texas.
No, Land's End. I buy Wisconsin.
All right, well, that makes it too easy, though, because you bought a shirt in Wisconsin and you live in Wisconsin.
Oh,
but
okay.
still, you have all of these various transactions that could obfuscate who actually has taxing authority for that.
Sure.
Now, you are supposed to, and people need to understand this, you are supposed to, as a citizen of the state of Wisconsin, voluntarily record what you bought online and pay sales tax on that when you file your tax return. We always do. My CPA always makes sure, let me know what you bought online, because we're going to add that here and remit sales tax to the state of Wisconsin.
But do most people even have a good sense for that? I
No.
mean, you know, my wife is like
$150 million a year for people not complying.
Okay. Now let's bring this back home. I work for the League of Municipalities. I work for cities and villages. You're talking a lot about sales tax. Right
Sure.
now in Wisconsin, local governments, counties have some sales tax authority, but cities and villages run on the property tax and shared revenue. Are you going to take that into your discussion? Is that something that's
So
going
that
to be
goes
looked
to your
at?
point, and I apologize I got off from that. So if you look at all of those different towers of revenue, our objective is to make sure that we have the proper mix of them. So too much of one is not good, and too little of another is not necessarily good. So there's an efficient ratio that you can look at that says we should have this much from this pile and this much from this, and so on and so forth. So we would look at the two that are disproportionately high right now, and that is property tax and income tax. Those need to come down. Those are disproportionately high. They disadvantage people. They discourage wealth creation, and so we need to take a look at that. The one that is disproportionately low is sales tax, but again, I don't want anybody to misconstrue that I'm talking about raising sales tax. I am not. I'm talking about closing some loopholes and providing a quality system. People need to understand we have $5 billion worth of sales tax revenue, but $6 billion worth of sales tax exemptions.
I heard you say that earlier. Give me an example.
So these
of
are
how
some of the funny
goofy this
things. Yeah,
system's
you got to
become.
take a look at it, and people need to understand that a Twix is tax exempt, but a Twizzlers is taxable. That makes no sense to me. A bag of marshmallows is tax exempt, but a can of marshmallow fluff is taxable. So it's very confusing, and people don't know. So if you have two of the same brand, so you have a fancy water. So you have a bottle of water that's sitting here from the exact same manufacturer right next to it, same bottle of water, except this one's got a little peach flavoring to it. The peach flavored one is taxable, the plain water one is not. Now consumers don't know that. They just go and they go, oh, I think I'll do the peach one. Well, they just made a taxable event right there. Or they go, well, I don't want peach, I'll take the other one, and then that one wouldn't be taxable. But it's fascinating because the tip of the tax iceberg is literally ice. We have an entire page in our tax code on how to tax ice. It's really quite funny.
It's not just one. Ice is, well, ice is not.
It's ice inside the glass, or if you buy a block of ice, or if you're buying dry ice. It's really funny to watch.
Okay, now property taxes. You mentioned personal property taxes. You talked about property taxes in Wisconsin are too high. Is that, in your view, because local spending is too high? Or is there another reason?
We relied on that too long. And I think by balancing that out, I think we can spread out the tax base and reduce some of the pressure on your constituents, on your members, and consequently the leadership in towns and cities and villages and counties. So I think there's an opportunity to do that if we look at all of those various areas. But we can take a look at some of the things that are profoundly inefficient and difficult to collect, and one is the personal property tax.
Sure.
But again, you can't look at the personal property tax conversation unless you have a different funding mechanism so that it doesn't go on to the tax rolls. So you have to dig into the tax code to have that conversation. So this is where it gets a little tricky. So you would want to rewrite what property is and define what property is and have that conversation. But I think you can do it, and I think you can lower the sales tax. I know there's some...
Lower the sales tax.
Right. I think if you stretch... So let's assume we still leave $3.5 billion worth of exemptions. So we're not going to have sales tax on medicine. We're not going to have sales tax on farm things. We're not going to have We're not going to have things where there's a tax on a tax. So you get through some of those things, and you just find what I think would be what I think we ought to be taking a look at. But those are the conversations we have to have. So, but I can tell you this. I don't want anybody to quote me on any specific ones, but I can tell you this. When we're generating $5 billion worth of sales tax, but we have $6 billion worth of exemptions, something's not right. And so if we could just take some of those and start looking at how we might do that, and everybody willing to trade and look at that and say, I would be willing to pay tax on sales tax on that, especially if we could lower it. If we can stretch out the base, think about what happens when we have that stretch. By definition, our sales tax is twice as high as it needs to be because we're taxing half the stuff.
Sure.
Right?
But as you said, you're not going to tax grandma's pills.
Right. We could never do that for a couple reasons. It just politically doesn't make a lot of sense. But more importantly, we're paying for half of it already, so we wouldn't want to tax ourselves. I mean, the portion. Yeah, correct. So you look at some of those efficiencies, and you just put economics down to it, and you go, okay, there's a lot of logical economic reasons why we want to leave that exempt. But we have to have that conversation. We should be bold enough to say, let's assume that on the 1st of January there are no more exemptions, and then let's start arguing for what those exemptions might be, and come up with a really good, honest, logical conversation. Because some of them, like we tax exempt clay pigeons. I don't know why we tax exempt clay pigeons, but we do.
Are they a form of waterfowl?
Now the clay ones, not the real ones. And so, if we can have those kinds of conversations, I think we can find enough fairness in the tax code to then offset some of the inefficient and unfair ones. Your members to collect personal property tax is a complicated process.
Sure.
And the same thing with shared revenue. Your counties and municipalities, that's a big, big line item in the budget. It's $754 million. And it hasn't been adjusted in 20 years, as you know. And it's difficult. You're constantly being asked to do more with less. And the problem is the way that grows, it's only growing at about a 0.5 percentage point. If we can shift that, I think it can grow to meet inflation, and I think all your members would enjoy that.
I'm talking to 88th District State Representative John Macco, Chairman of the Assembly Ways and Means Committee, about blowing up is a rude word, about fundamentally restructuring our tax system in Wisconsin. John, I've been a lobbyist for 20 years, give or take. And what you're describing in some ways is a full employment act for lobbyists.
Sure.
You know, there are 1,000 different special interests that are going to come knocking on your door. Tell me how you're going to structure this conversation. How's this going to work? You're holding hearings right now, right? You've had 1, 2. You're going to have a couple more.
Yep, we've had 3 hearings on various types of taxation. So one was on property tax, then one was on excise taxes, and so tomorrow we're having one on income taxes. So, and the purpose is to not add a value statement to it, but to understand how it works, who it applies to, how it's collected, the pros and cons of that particular revenue stream. So we're going to go through all of that next week. Then our hearing next week, Thursday, will be on how all of that collects for the state and how it relates and connects to municipalities and counties and towns and so on and so forth. So it's my hope then is once we have a cursory understanding of how all the pieces work and how they move, then we can then take a look at it. Because again, as I mentioned this noon, prescription without diagnosis is malpractice. So we want to diagnose the issue first, and then hopefully through the course of conversation with individuals like yourself, other special interest groups and lobbyists, as well as all interested parties, to make sure that we have a win-win for everybody at every stretch of the economic strata. We want to make sure that this is not a regressive process, that it actually fixes the problem. And I think we'll get there. And what I'm finding is that the individuals, when I ask them, well, how do you have that little special carve out and that little special interest thing? They're like, well, you know, that was during the XYZ administration and it's all we could get, so that's what we took. And I said, would you be willing to trade that little special bauble for actual tax change? And all of them said, yeah, in a minute.
Okay. So, and I've read some of the things you've said in the media about this. This is not about balancing the state budget or balancing a local budget. This is really not about how much. This is a matter about proportion.
Correct.
Am I correct?
Yeah. And that's a good point to know, because I want to make sure everybody understands I'm not raising revenue. The governor's made it clear he will not tolerate tax increases, and that's fine. So what we're shooting for, what we hope to be able to shoot for, is if this is done economically. It's very similar to having 120 pounds of air pressure in your car tires, except 90 pounds are in one tire and 10 pounds in the other 3. If you could balance that out so that you would have 30 pounds in each tire, now you could get somewhere. And it's the same way. I don't think we need, on a $36 billion budget, I don't know that we need additional revenue. But I think if it was in the right buckets and it was flowing right, and individuals and organizations had much less drag on that economy, that you would then see us functioning at a much better level. And it's not dissimilar, if you remember, Arthur Laffer in the early 80s had the Laffer curve, and he was able to demonstrate that you reach a point of diminishing return when you can keep raising taxes and you actually generate less taxes, and that by lowering the brackets, you actually get additional revenue, and that in fact happened. Now, we're not talking about doing that. We're talking about rebalancing and putting some fairness back into it across all spectrums, so that it helps the poor folks that are the folks that are making under $42,000 a year, that it helps the job creators who are working hard to try and build the Wisconsin and keep us in that number 1 or number 2 position in manufacturing. And then it also helps retirees. The number 2 license that anybody in my business gets is for the state of Florida. You know why? Because half of your clients are going to become resident of the state of Florida at some point in time, especially when they retire, because they have no income tax. So we need to take a look at that and see. The people talk about sales taxes being regressive, and that's true. We need to take a look at it, make sure we don't cross that barrier. But income tax is profoundly regressive as well. So we need to fix that to make sure that we're managing those economic levers in an efficient way, and build a portfolio of revenue that the state can function on to deliver. Our purpose is to deliver the needs that the state of Wisconsin needs to deliver to its people, and for infrastructure, and for schools, and for transportation, but do it in a much more efficient and effective way that's more fair.
What's your goal? When do you want to produce a final product?
Well, if you ask me, I want to do it in April. But my sense is this will be a 2-year conversation.
Okay.
We have looked at, we found a fellow, Senator Leon was a senator back in the 90s. He was chair of joint finance. I tracked him down. He's in his 70s. I tracked him down in his winter home and said, hey, why didn't this work in 91 when you wanted Governor Thompson to do it? And found out what the problems were with that. When Speaker Jensen was speaker in 2005, he had some great papers on some of this stuff. I said, hey, why didn't this work then? Tell me what was wrong with that. So we're taking all of the lessons that we learned over the last 30 years and saying, is maybe now the time to do those collectively? And if we did it and we had the guts to do it, could we have something great that would provide the foundation for job creation and families and retirees and the whole shooting match? And I think we can. The preliminary numbers look like we can.
Great goal. Is there a state that's accomplished this?
So there's a great question. So this is the challenge. So the last state that did a major overhaul like this was South Dakota in 1965. We also have some examples. We can take a look at what I believe Kansas and Ohio have done and how they've executed poorly. So they're attempting to do some tax reform, but they didn't think it through. So we want to be more like Carolina. We want to be more like Utah. And I think we can do that. And with the strength that we have, as the governor talked about in his budget, the time to do some of these things, whether it's in one fell swoop or to phase them in, is at a time of strength. When we don't necessarily need to do it, but we have the opportunity to manage into that paradigm shift. You don't want to have this conversation when your back's against the wall and all holy heck is breaking loose.
Right, when you've got a huge budget deficit or whatever. John, I want to ask you a couple of closing questions here. What is your greatest fear, or what's the thing that's most likely going to trip this thing up?
That's a great question. And I'll tell you what, is if somebody blinks. The problem is that we all have to come together on it. If I get one group or the other that is recalcitrant about working on a program, that can't see the forest for the trees, then we're going to have a problem. And I think the biggest danger is that we don't think big enough, that all we do is nip around the edges and kick it down the road, and we don't have a program that could actually fix our finance structure for generations. That's the biggest risk, if we just don't think big enough.
And do you think thinking big makes this easier to do than just
Absolutely.
Shaving it, doing it incrementally?
My experience tells me that's what it is. And I'll tell you what, it's just like Collins talked about in his book, Good to Great. Mm-hmm. The enemy of great is good.
Is good.
And so everybody's going, hey, it's great. It's good. Why do you want to worry about it? Because I think we can get to great. I mean, I think we can move. Our tax structure, as we talked about today, is in the top 5, along with California, Illinois, New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. I don't want to be in that company. Mm-hmm. Now, I think we've got an opportunity to unburden our citizens, stretch that out a little bit more, make that a lot more equitable, and help everybody at every economic strata, and provide a platform that will provide us the revenue that we need to continue to grow and service the people of the state of Wisconsin. I think we can do that.
Great. I'm talking with State Representative John Macco, the 88th Assembly District, Chair of the Assembly Ways and Means Committee, about restructuring in a very big way Wisconsin's tax code. Yeah. Any final thoughts on this, John? Any words of...
No, I appreciate you talking about it, and that's what it's going to take. It's going to take everybody coming together and saying, hey, have you thought about this? Because I don't have all the answers. Have you thought about this? Let's incorporate that. If we can concentrate on the problem, on solving the problem, admitting the problem and working towards that, this should be a bipartisan conversation. This should not be a partisan conversation. There should be an ability to get all of these pieces put together. So I really hope that organizations like yours have been very helpful in coming up with some ideas. I love corrective criticism if it moves me towards the goal. And so I'm hoping to continue this conversation in the future, and maybe one day we'll have a bill signing.
I suspect we'll be talking again.
Sure.
Been very interesting. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Again, my guest, John Macco, Chairman of the Assembly Ways and Means Committee. I'm Jerry Deschane. This has been The Local Perspective, brought to you by the League of Wisconsin Municipalities. but we really want to thank our friends here at Wisconsin Eye for hosting us today, providing us with the technical expertise. And we want to also thank our local cable channels for distributing this. Thanks very much and have a great day.